The crossbow's string sang a low, dangerous note as Tywin Lannister drew it back and let his breath out through his nose. A chill draft crept through the tower corridor, smelling of cold stone and the sea. In the privy beyond the door, his father's voice came steady and dry, the same voice that had ordered men to slaughter at the Green Fork and sit in long councils over maps and debts. The same voice that had told Tyrion he was a monster at birth and a liability thereafter. "You always were a curious boy," Tywin Lannister said. "Open the door. If you must shame me, do it as a son, not as a thief." Tyrion's hand shook, just slightly, enough for the coral to scrape against the groove. Shay's necklace gnawed his palm. He had not realized until moments ago how thin a thing a chain was, how light a life between two hands. Even now the heat of her skin lingered along his wrists, a ghost that would not be washed away by any wine. He pushed the door wide and stepped into the rush of lantern light and the human stink of the chamber. The Lord of Casterly Rock did not rise. He sat straight on the wooden seat as if it were a carved chair of state, his wrists resting lightly on his knees, his face not yet shaved for mourning, his cheek shadowed in iron gray. The chamberlain's robe hung on a hook, and the great red and gold cloak pooled at his feet as if it could not bear to fall to the floor. Tywin regarded the crossbow not with fear but with calculation, as if measuring range and angle. "You had Shay in your bed," Tyrion said. His mouth felt wrong around the words. "My father, who spoke of family as if it were law. My father who would tie alliances with a knot and sever lives with a nod. You had a whore in your bed." "My whore." Tywin's eyes did not flinch. "She was a camp follower. She followed gold. You gave her gold. She came to me when you would have died. You speak as if I betrayed you. You put yourself in a pit and bark that the rope tied about you is too rough." The coral's tip hovered. The weight of it made his wrists ache. He could hear his heart beating, a slap against his ribs. He thought of Blackwater, of wildfire blooming on the bay like green flowers, of his father riding through the gates in the Lannister gold that meant victory or ruin. He thought of his brother's missing hand and his sister's hard mouth, and himself, the imp, a well-dressed jester at the edge of banquets and councils, always half inside the circle and half out. "Do you ever tire," Tyrion said, "of speaking as if the world is a ledger? Do you ever tire of mistaking a ledger for a noose?" Tywin answered, "I did not come here to be judged by a dwarf's grievance. I came to put a king on a throne and keep him there. Put away the crossbow." "And why should I do that?" "Because you are my son," Tywin said, and this time the words were measured as if weighed against two different fates. "And because I have use for you yet." Tyrion swallowed. The word son dropped like a pebble into a deep well. He could feel Varys's hands on his arms in the darkness of the passage, could hear Jaime's hurried whisper, the clink of keys, the fear in his brother's good voice. He had come here to finish a life, to end it cleanly or end it badly, but to end it. And suddenly he saw what followed after. The city shaken, Cersei's shriek ripping through the Red Keep, the gold cloaks hunting every hole in the city, Jaime's face a walled garden with the flowers cut off at the stems, a realm not steadied but thrown off balance, and only Cersei's hands left to hold or drop whatever she pleased. "You mean to send me to the wall," Tyrion said. "You meant it long before, when you let me have my little play-acting trial and bid me choose champions in a pit. Send the dwarf to the cold and call it mercy." Tywin's mouth might have moved by a fraction. Could have been a smile or a tightening in pain. "There is no mercy here. There is prudence and there is waste. If you kill me, you will be hunted before the dawn bell. Your brother will suffer for what you did, though I do not believe he will beg. You will make enemies you have not yet imagined. If you put down the crossbow, you will go to the wall with a black cloak around your shoulders, and you will live and be forgotten by those who would otherwise spin your death into their nets. The Watch needs men who can add, not only men who can swing swords. You can add. And my father gets to sit a little more comfortably," Tyrion said, "and pretend he does not stink like the rest of us. Your father gets to keep a boy king from becoming a puppet for the Reach or a toy for your sister," Tywin said. "If I stink, it is for the same reason any lord of the realm does. I do the work that others like to pretend happens by itself. Tyrion took a breath and lowered the crossbow. It made a heavy sound when it touched the stone. The relief left him almost limp. He stood for a moment, the two of them with only the scraping of the brazier coals between them, then turned and left the chamber, Shay's chain biting his palm. In the darkness of the passage, Varys's soft face emerged like a coin from a sleeve. "Wise," the spider murmured, "and uncharacteristically so." "Don't mistake me for your pupil," Tyrion said. "I have simply run out of quarrels." As they moved through the bowels of the tower, Tyrion knew without doubt that some peril awaited in every turn. It was too neat, the promise and the path, the rope lowered into the pit just as he was about to jump. He had put his life into hands that had put a dozen realms' lives into careful balances. The cold air made him sober, and in that sobriety was a clear, thin fear. The guards stopped them 2 levels down. Not fools in gold cloaks, but Lannister men in crimson and black, spears crossed. Their sergeant had the square jaw of the West and a scar that neatly bisected his eyebrow, a man who had carried orders one place and heads another, without making much of either. Varys spread his fingers as if to show they were harmless. "The Lord hands orders," the sergeant said. "The dwarf may go. The eunuch stays." Tyrion did not curse or plead. He simply looked at the sergeant until the man shifted his weight. "Do tell my father that the spider's webs hold up much of his house," Tyrion said. "If he means to pull, he should be sure which thread he takes." The sergeant said nothing in reply, and that was answer enough. They took Varys's arms gently, almost courteously, and drew him back into the shadows. Tyrion walked on alone beneath the red keep, a single candle in his hand, a crossbow abandoned in gloom. By the time he climbed into the night, the eastern sky was paling. He could hear the sea slapping at the black stones below the city with the patience of a god that did not need to hurry. He was put in chains by noon and brought before his father by dusk. Tywin Lannister sat very straight in the solar, his face composed, his clerk poised with a quill. Cersei was there too, a brightness in silk and fury, and Jaime, tired-eyed, the lines around his mouth cut deeper by a day without sleep. "Father," Jaime began. "You will be silent," Tywin said, without raising his voice, and Jaime took a breath and closed his mouth. Tyrion glanced at the windows, at the light declining over the city, at a great map pinned with flags in the western quarter, at a stack of letters sealed with 6 different sigils. "You will take the black," Tywin said. Cersei's eyes flashed. "He poisoned Joffrey," she said. "He murdered my boy. He strangled a whore in your bed like a dog. You will sit," Tywin said. It made no difference whether Cersei was standing or not. The command had already placed her where he wanted. She sat. The Lord of Casterly Rock nodded to the clerk, who began to read a parchment with the cadence of a prayer. Tyrion could pick out the words: exile at the wall, the Night's Watch for life, forfeiture of lands and titles, commutation of sentence under the king's mercy. It went on until even Cersei stopped whispering outrages to herself. When it was finished, Tyrion grinned in the manner of a man with a tooth knocked out and held forward in his palm. "Bow or noose," he said softly. "I did always look well in black." "See him out by morning," Tywin said, "and see that he arrives. If he turns aside at any holdfast between here and Queen's Crown, the steward who lets him do so will be a head shorter. And you will escort him, Ser Adam." The sergeant from the corridor stepped forward. Adam Marbrand had flame-colored hair and the weary patience of men who had watched too many young lords make mistakes and too many old ones insist that they had not. Tyrion lifted his wrists and waggled the chain as if it were jewelry. Cersei rose and left with a whisper of silk, fury like perfume. Jaime stayed, hands and fists at his sides. When the door had shut, Tywin leaned back and folded his hands on his desk. "You freed him," Tywin said. Jaime nodded once. "And he came to me with a loaded crossbow." "He did," Jaime said, with a calm that might have been defiance. "And then he didn't fire." Tywin's gaze was a blade drawn soundlessly. "You will go to the Riverlands at dawn," he said. Edmure Tully still sits in a cell at the Twins. You will take him out and you will make Riverrun yield. When it yields, you will send him to Casterly Rock's custody and dismiss Blackwalder's men from the gates of Lord Hoster's castle. If you cannot find the right words, you will find the right threats. Jaime's mouth twisted. You want me to threaten to hang a baby on a trebuchet again? I want you to be Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Tywin said, who puts an end to a war without needing to murder a child. I want you to remember that flaying and feast are neither of them our house words. Jaime's gaze flicked to the map of the Riverlands, to the narrow blue threads of the Tumblestone and the Red Fork, to the little painted fish of Riverrun. He nodded again, more slowly this time, as a man accepts armor he knows will chafe him raw. When will you dismiss me from the Kingsguard? Jaime asked, and he could not keep the bitterness entirely out. When you come to your senses, Tywin said, or when the realm demands it. I would prefer the first. Jaime's laugh had no joy in it. He left without bowing. Tyrion could hear his steps fade down the corridor, confident only in their length. You are not a fool, father, Tyrion said. You simply pretend to be made only of stone and gold. Stone and gold last, Tywin said. Now go. The city will be easier for your absence. The morning was gray and stiff with cold when they put Tyrion on a horse and set out. The gates groaned. The city watched, as cities always watch, from the shadow of archways and from behind shutters, unseen eyes counting men and wagons, memorizing faces for a day when memories might be sold.
Se Adam se tabrisk pasa.
They rode with 6 Lannister men and 2 men of the watch. The black cloaks looked as if they had borrowed their dignity from older, taller brothers. The King's Road north was a scar through woods that were beginning to whisper of winter. Half a day out, a farm wife stood in a field with a frozen bucket, a red scarf at her throat, and watched Tyrion as if he were a trick her husband might teach her to do if he ever returned. She had a baby bundled at her chest. The baby had a nose and a mouth and 2 small fists, and Tyrion wondered if its mother had counted each finger and been relieved. He hoped so. Some prayers were simple enough that even gods heard them. They passed the charred posts of a ruined inn and an orchard left to rot with fruit frozen black on the branches. They slept one night at a holdfast where the walls were patched with wagon boards and the gate had to be lifted aside with 6 men because the hinge had rotted through. Ser Adam kept the men rinking lightly, never enough to unbalance them. In the morning, a skinny boy tried to sell Tyrion a dog the color of mud, insisting it could hunt rabbits and wolves and treason if trained properly. Tyrion declined without cruelty and gave him 2 coppers for knowing so many words. On the 3rd day, a storm blew wet across the road, and they dripped like line of laundry when they reached Moat Caelin's southern approach. There the watchmen took over. 2 more had joined them, silent as crows, black cloaks heavy with rain. Ser Adam unfastened Tyrion's chains himself and drew him aside under the leaning ruin of a tower. If you send a raven, Adam said, do not send it to the Red Keep. I had thought of sending it to Casterly Rock, Tyrion said. There is a nice hollow there where letters sink and are never seen again. Send it to your brother, Adam said. His ravens find their roosts. Adam offered his hand. Tyrion took it, small within Adam's hard grip. Tell my father, he said, that if the wall has need of account books, it will be my pleasure to use one larger than his. Adam's mouth twitched. It was not exactly a smile. He rode south at once, his men a flush of red among the gray. Castle Black was patched and bandaged from the summer's wound. The great gate had been reinforced with new timber. The dead trees cut from the haunted forest made rough palisades. Men moved with the briskness of the cold and the aftermath of fear. The first ranger Tyrion saw was a boy with a face that had forgotten how to be soft. He bore a spear with the reverence of a chalice-bearer. Present him to the Lord Commander, one of the black-cloaked escorts said. Which one? Tyrion asked lightly. The man blinked the question off his eyelashes. We're electing, again. They brought him to the common hall where smoke pressed low and men argued as if the wind coming through the cracks might be argued away. On a dais of planks, 3 men spoke in turns over a clatter of tankards and spoons. Janos Slint, heavy with self-importance, his voice old wine turned sour. Dennis Mallister, white-haired and thin as a reed, with dignity like a carved figurehead. Othel Yarwick, with a smith's hands and an honest look. Above them, hung on pegs and nails, were antlers and old weapons and a faded banner that had once been a sullen black. Tyrion was drawing breath to drop a quip into the crowd when he saw the man in the shadow near the back pillar and forgot to say anything at all. Stannis Baratheon was hard eyelids and stubborn jaw, a man who looked at the world as if it were breaking its promise to him. Melisandre stood beside him like a bright wound. Light clung to her as if she were its idea rather than its reflection. "The dwarf of Lannister," Stannis said flatly as Tyrion approached, as if naming a duty he had to perform. "You owe me a city, and the realm owes you a crown," Tyrion said. "Neither of us is likely to collect in full." There might have been the ghost of a twitch at Stannis's mouth. It vanished quickly. "Have you come to join the Watch or to ruin it?" "I have come to be counted among men who do not get to choose whether they fight monsters or men," Tyrion said. "Either that or to sleep in an unheated cell and be called Crow until my beard grows white. I do have a fondness for choices that make my sister gnash her teeth." "A common taste," Melisandre murmured. Her eyes were too bright. She made Tyrion think of walls burning. He slept the first night on straw and woke with the certainty that he had made a decision that would not be called wise by anyone who counted wisdom in coin. By afternoon he had a ledger before him and a quill in hand, and the feel of ink on paper came as a small mercy. Men who had learned to sharpen fletching and clean blood from mail learned quickly to tally oats and candles when the cold demanded it. Janos Slint's supporters were easily flattered into listing stores. Dennis Mallister's men were easily shamed into finding more. Othel's men needed only to be told that the hinges would seize if the oil ran out. He heard of wildlings less as enemies than as cold men and women with fewer blankets than they needed and children running, always running. He listened to the mutter about the dead that walked. He put those words aside where he kept other words that sounded mad until they turned out to be simple truths. Jon Snow, Jon not Jon, arrived on the third day from a patrol along the East Road with frost on his lashes and a face that might have been made to grow into command if it had not been asked to grow too quickly. He looked at Tyrion as one looks at an old cruelty that somehow becomes a kindness when the cold sets in. "You kept your promise," Jon said. "I keep those promises I make when I am not drunk," Tyrion said. "Though just now I would sell both for a fire that did not smoke." "Then you'll get on," Jon said, nodding toward the ledger. "We need arithmetic more than cleverness. But I'll take both if you have them." Tyrion had both, and he poured them out without stint, as if cleverness were wine that needed to be drunk before it turned sour. The Silent Sisters had no work here, not for now. The dead were burned quickly. It was the living who needed tending. He found winter stores miscounted and counted them again, and in the counting found a way to trade nails to a wildling camp for 2 sows and a goat. Stannis's quartermaster had a tight mouth and tighter fingers. Tyrion pried them loose with an argument about the Iron Bank that put a gleam of unpleasant curiosity behind Stannis's eyes. "Your father will send," Stannis said after listening, as if conceding a difficult move. 200 spears, perhaps. A polite letter with a stamp on wax. A clever gesture so that when the cold comes down like a roof, he will be able to say he did his part. He is not a man to give his enemy what his enemy truly needs. "Nor are you," Tyrion said. "We do none of us give anything the other truly needs. We give what buys us the time to make the next bargain." "Then let us bargain," said Stannis, in a voice that did not know how to jest. "Give me words that make your father pay his debts, and I will give this wall room to breathe." Tyrion spoke to the Iron Bank in a letter that named numbers and names like weapons. He wrote of Lannister mines that had run dry and ships that had to be paid for with promissory notes, and of the Reach's patience that was not infinite. He wrote of Stannis Baratheon, who was tedious as hunger and just as permanent, and of how investments sometimes grew in the cold more slowly but more surely than in heat. He sealed the letter with black wax. He slept without wine for the first time in months and woke to a dreamless morning and the sound of men arguing about who should be their commander. When Jon was elected, narrowly, with Tyrion's arithmetic turning a handful of grudges into a larger handful of votes. Stannis's mouth twitched again, and the men by the fire grunted as if they had each eaten something too hot but were determined to swallow it. Janos Slynt raged. Dennis Mallister bowed graciously and looked relieved to sit down. The watch cheered not loudly, because cheering wastes breath, but with a thudding of mugs on table that made the boards tremble. Jon's eyes met Tyrion's across the hall. They were the same gray as the morning over the ice, and something in them steadied Tyrion's spirit. The next raven northward carried not only the letter for Braavos but one with Tyrion's crabbed hand to King's Landing, addressed not to the Red Keep, as Ser Adam had warned him against, but to a certain inn on the Street of Sisters where a woman served a flatbread he knew his brother liked when they were boys. Letters found their way when they wanted to, like rats or rumors. In the city that letter crossed, Tywin Lannister held himself upright in the painted chair by the window and considered how silence could be used to make a point. Cersei poured wine as if it were the only instrument of statecraft she trusted. Marjorie Tyrell sat across from Tommen with a smile that looked like a beam of sun on water, bright but not too warm. Kevan Lannister stood near the map table, eyes on his brother's face, hands behind his back as if not to betray what they wanted to do. "We will not arm the faith," Tywin said, as if announcing that the sunrise would be delayed. "The realm requires one authority, and that is the crown. The faith may bless it. It may not police it." "The High Septon is offended," Cersei said sharply. "He says our city reeks of sin. He says, the High Septon may smell incense when he goes to his cell," Tywin said, "and vinegar when he cleans it himself. We will give him the one and not the other. Pay for repairs to his September, send food to his soup kitchens. Do not give him swords." She opened her mouth to argue and shut it again, furious at having none of the tools she preferred at hand. She would have liked a knife on the table and a victim within reach. She had neither. "Lord Paxter's fleet remains at the Arbor," Kevan said. "He says he awaits fair wind and fair word." "Send him both," Tywin said. "A fair word. The Reach's harvest is needed in King's Landing and at Dragonstone and at Gulltown. And a fair wind. 3,000 oaken oarsmen whose wives will receive coin from the crown to keep them rowing harder." He tapped a small carved ship on the map and sent it skittering up the Mander. "The Ironborn stir. We will not have them in the Whispering Sound if we can help it." Cersei laughed, short and brittle. "Randall Tarley will like that," she said. "He can preen on his damned charger for a month." "Randall Tarley will have work," Tywin said. "And he works best when the work feels dirty. Send him to the Shield Islands. Send Garland Tyrell with him. No banners more than are needed. No boasting." "And if they meet Euron Greyjoy?" Cersei asked. "If the Crow's son fancies a new crown?" Tywin took a sip of water. "Then Lord Tarley will take it from him and send it to me in a sack," he said. "And I will hang it in the Red Keep's armory to collect dust. Men who name themselves kings on islands find them windy and wet." He wrote letters to Dorne, where Prince Doran's answers came back slow and mild as gentle rain. "We grieve, we remember. We will wait to strike where it pains most when it pained us most." Tywin sent the skull anyway, a heavy parcel packed in straw, and a promise of justice that meant as much as such a promise could. He wrote to the Vale, where the lords declarant eyed one another like dogs in a courtyard, and in each letter he did not mention Sansa Stark by name and yet named her in all the words he did not write. Littlefinger wrote back in a hand that smiled without showing teeth. "The girl you seek is not the girl you think. The Vale is as high as it ever was, and I remain, as ever, your humble servant." "Little men," Tywin said softly in his study, more to the paper than to Kevan. "Small hands, big appetite. Peter Baelish made our coin move when it would not," Kevan said. "And he moved more of it than we knew," Tywin said. "He has always liked the game better than the prize. He sent Jaime to the Riverlands with a troop leaner than his sister would have liked and heavier than his brother would." Letters went with him instructing those Freys who still understood duty more than flattery to do as they had promised at the Twins without creating the need for yet more promises. Edmure Tully was taken from his cell and told that his wife was heavy with child, and that the child would have a cradle or a hangman's rope depending on how quickly he remembered the names of his bannermen and the way their gates opened. Jaime rode under a gray sky and slept one night in a stable because the lord of an unimportant tower had forgotten, after all these months, to send his squire down to open the keep gates when he heard the trumpet. He dreamed of snow and of a white book with blank pages and woke with straw in his hair and a stubbornness lodged behind his tongue. When he came to Riverrun, the Blackfish stood on the walls with his weathered face and his long eye, and he did not shout. Jaime raised his banner and did not shout either. They looked at one another as soldiers who had missed their war's due. Inside, Edmure trembled, not with fear but with an exhaustion so complete it had become its own patience. "My uncle will not yield," he said. "Not for me, not for anyone. That is his virtue and his sin." "Then he will yield for your child," Jaime said, "or your child will swing. I have seen men die for less." Edmure shut his eyes. "I know," he said, and the words came out like meat scraped from bone. "I will go up and open the gates. That is the nature of this age," the Blackfish said an hour later on the river wall, with his eyes on the water. "We do not win wars. We open gates. We do not open all of them," Jaime said. "Some we hold shut." The surrender was quiet and ugly and necessary. No drums, no banners torn, just men laying down spears in a yard that had seen wedding torches not so many months ago. Jaime set a guard, spoke to those Freys who could read without moving their lips, and sent Edmure under escort to a tower in the west where Casterly Rock owned everything, including the air its prisoners breathed. The Blackfish melted like fog and was gone, and even those who hated him could not help but admire a man who knew when to keep his own legend alive. In the Reach, the Redwynes winched their oars down and pushed, and Paxter's banners crowded the Mander with a practical beauty that did not need poetry to praise it. Randall Tarley rode as if his horse's hooves were offended by the ground. He met a Greyjoy raiding party at the mouth of the River Cockleswap and put them back into their boats with 3 clean charges that none of the singers who later wrote about it would think impressive enough to sing. The Ironborn went east again and then north and then somewhere else. They were fishers of trouble. When they did not find it, they bit men who were not expecting to be bitten and swam away. Marjorie Tyrell turned Tommen's days into measured loops of comfort and duty. She taught him to listen to petitions with his hands folded and to stroke cats with his hands open. She laughed easily, and people liked to have her nearby because joy is a commodity that buys many things. She did not forget to be wary. Cersei watched her like a hawk that has only one eye and will not waste it blinking. In one of those afternoons when a faint breeze came off the bay and the palace windows stood open like mouths thirsting for air, Tywin Lannister called Cersei to him alone. There was wine on the table and a paper knife beside the decanter that glinted. "You will marry Ser Loras Tyrell," he said without preface. She laughed. The sound was bright and hollow. "I will not." "You will," he said, as if he were telling her the weather that would occur, and then repeated himself, which he did not do often. "You will. The Reach will send wheat and men. In return, the crown will give them a queen who knows how to be a queen." She moved to the window and looked down at the glitter of water between the masts of ships. "I will not leave my son," she said. "I will not share a bed with a boy who loves boys. I will not go where I am not wanted." "You will share a bed with a boy who loves his house," Tywin said. "And your son will be a king with 2 great houses holding him up instead of one that frets and claws. Your pride is not a brazier we can burn the world in. You will go to Highgarden, and you will do it with your head held high because everyone will be watching." She turned, slower than anger, and her eyes were older than the rest of her face. "If you had loved me," she said, aloud and amazed, as if she had not intended to say it, "you would not do this." "If I had loved you more," Tywin said, "I would have done it sooner." She went to her rooms and threw chairs until the legs were as broken as her words. She wrote a letter and tore it. She sent for Qyburn and did not tell him why. He came anyway, as men do when there is advancement in it, and quietly began to gather trays and vials, and the silence that followed him into the queen's chambers smelled of bitter herbs. Tywin considered Qyburn in the way that one considers a new tool that is not exactly legal to use. He allowed him to tend the mountain's poison-gnawed body and forbade him to make a monster of it. "If you show me a thing that looks like a knight and does not breathe," he said, "I will have your head taken off and your hands nailed to the Red Keep gate with a sign that says, 'This is what happens to men who cannot tell life from death.'" Qyburn bowed. "Then I shall be very precise in my definitions, my lord." Dorne's letter came back with a ribbon the color of pomegranate. Prince Doran wrote carefully because he had arthritis that made care necessary, and because he had a mind like a library, patient and full. "We will have our vengeance in time," it said in sweet words, "and our time is not your time. Myrcella is safe and happy and learning to ride." And in the margins was a small, neat note that only Tywin would have noticed. "She has learned also to be careful with knives." Through it all the ravens flew, back and forth, like a steady exchange of breath between a body and its lungs. From the wall, letters came not only with the crowded blocky script of stewards but with Jon's grim hand. "We are holding," he wrote. "We need flour more than steel. And the wildlings are as many as the trees and fewer than the ghosts men tell me of, which is to say, less dangerous up close. And Stannis has gone to the north to cut the heart out of the Boltons. He says the heart is Winterfell. I say the heart is winter." Tyrion wrote to Jaime, not to his father. Sometimes he wrote only to tell him of a joke he had heard that would make their sister furious. Sometimes he wrote about levers and fulcrums and how men moved when fed or when warmed. He told him a story about a wildling girl with a tooth missing who could skin a rabbit faster than any cook Tyrion had known in King's Landing. He told him he had begun to sleep. He did not tell him about the whore's chain in the drawer under his bunk, or how he took it out sometimes and watched light creep along its links as if it were a thing alive that might slither off when he looked away. In the Vale, Sansa, Elaine Stone, learned to pour wine so that men forgot she had hands and to stand where a shadow fell so that men forgot she had eyes. Littlefinger taught her lies like dances and truths like poisons. The Lord's declarant grew tired as winter grew near. Men are quicker to tire when they cannot go hunting. Bronze Yohn Royce received a letter with the Lannister lion impressed upon it and smelled the wax and smiled without humor. "We are far from lions here," he said to his son. "We have eagles. We have stones. We have patience." "Patience is not a sword," Nestor Royce said. "It is if you use it correctly," Bronze Yohn said. "It cuts men through the guts. They open themselves." And in a cold tower in Old Town, where lanterns swung and glass candles that did not burn glowed faintly whether men were watching or not, Archmaester Marwyn muttered over a page about dragons and closed the book with a sound like a door shut against a gale. "He will not believe until he must," he said to no one, and the words might have been about any lord in the realm. War threw out its usual roots and tendrils, and Tywin pruned them with letters and with gold. He named men warden and took the title back when it grew to mean more to them than to him. He walked in the garden of the Red Keep in the mornings when the dew was caught in spider silk and did not think of Varys, because thinking of Varys would not bring him back. If he was troubled in the small hours, when an old pain in his side woke him, he did not say so. One night Tommen crept into his solar with Ser Pounce under his arm and stood there as if a small boy could be invisible if he believed in it strongly enough. Tywin set down his quill. "Grandfather," Tommen said, "is it true I am to have 2 queens?" "You will have 1 queen at a time," Tywin said. "That is the custom. Marjorie will be your queen now. Later, when she is gone, you may have another." Tommen frowned, thinking hard in the way of children, which resembles sincerity and is sometimes its cousin. "Will my mother be a queen?" "She will be Lady of Highgarden," Tywin said, "which is a different thing and an honorable one." "Will I see her?" "Of course," Tywin said. "You are the king." Tommen blinked. "Sometimes when I tell Ser Meryn I am the king, he says, 'Yes, your grace,' and then he doesn't do what I asked." "Then you must learn to ask correctly," Tywin said gently, and was surprised to hear himself be gentle. "And sometimes you must learn not to ask at all but to choose men who will do the thing before you ask it." Tommen nodded and rubbed Ser Pounce's ear. "I want men who like cats," he said. with the earnestness of a boy who has found a principle he can live by. "An excellent start," Tywin said, and when Tommen left, he found that he was smiling, a small and private feeling that did not have to be displayed on any banner. Winter came in a long breath. It did not break. It did not storm. Simply settled the way old age settles. Stannis wrote from the north, heading to Winterfell. The words had no decoration. They did not need any. Roose Bolton wrote from Winterfell. Loyal to the crown, conditions severe, require bread and men. Tywin wrote back to both with the same pen, which pleased him in a childish way he would not have confessed. He was not minded to spend good Lannister men in a land that ate them like a wolf eats lambs in a pen. He sent enough to be seen to be sent and kept more at home, where the Ironborn would not stand still, where the faith muttered and planned, where the Reach smiled prettily while counting, always counting. "So we will let the North devour itself," Cersei said, when she had learned to speak to him as if he were a mountain and she were a weather vane. "We will allow necessary losses," Tywin said. "The North will never love us. The best we can do is make it too tired to hate us well." "You always speak as if you are playing with stones," she said. "They are people. They are both," he said. "If you do not learn when to treat them as one and when as the other, you will lose whatever game you think you are playing." In the Far East, Daenerys Targaryen, who had been a girl and a bride and a widow all at once, made choices in Meereen that would seem slow and foolish to those who have never commanded a city where every street has a dagger hidden under its stones. Tywin heard of her dragons as one reads of weather in a place one does not intend to visit. He instructed the Master of Whisperers, who was not Varys anymore, who was a clever, forgettable man from Lannisport with a modest beard, to pay men in Yunkai and in Astapor to make sure Daenerys found enough enemies to keep her busy. He did not say aloud that dragons change a game one has spent a lifetime learning to play. He simply set more pieces on the board and waited. The Iron Bank's answer came like the return of a hawk that had flown a long circle, not precisely predictable and yet expected. "We thank the Crown for its frankness and its demonstration of will," the letter read. "We perceive that stability is a form of profit. We will extend instruments sufficient to maintain essential functions of state at an interest that indicates our displeasure and our pragmatic respect." Tywin smiled without showing teeth. Stannis frowned over the same words and saw promise and insult both. That is the nature of letters. They instruct her. Uct men in who they are more than in what is happening. At the wall, Tyrion watched Jon's snow-balanced brotherhood and command like a bowl of hot stew in a snowstorm, and he helped where he could, which often meant calculating how many men one could feed on oats while promising them bread in the spring. Sometimes at night he went up on the ramparts and stared north, and thought about a world that had enemies too patient to hate and too numerous to count. It sobered him more than any lecture his father had ever delivered. On a morning when the sun was a pale coin and the wind delighted in lifting fur edges into small ripples, Melisandre stood beside him without a sound and said, "You did not kill your father." "No," Tyrion said, "not in the way you mean." Her smile was all teeth. "In that you show more wisdom than most killers. He is a wall. It is useful to know when not to pull down a wall. Sometimes a gate appears." "You speak as if the world is made of riddles," Tyrion said. "It is," she answered, looking out at the line where snow became sky. "Some of us learn the answers, and some of us learn how to light fires instead." "Your fires are very bright," Tyrion said. "Forgive me if I keep my hands out of them." "They will be needed," she said. "There are fires that cleanse and fires that reveal. Winter is a god that does not forgive." She looked at him then as if measuring his bones. "Your father would die for stone. Would you?" "Only if the stone were tossed at my sister," Tyrion said, and she laughed. It was a dry sound. The first letter that spoke of a man with a crown of wet iron came from the Shield Islands. The second came from Old Town, where men had always thought west and sea were as safe as bookshelves, and suddenly found themselves with wet pages. Tywin pinned those letters on the map with narrow knives. He sent more ships and sent them faster. He sent a letter to the Hightower that made Lord Leighton show his face in public for the first time in months, and sent a letter to Randall Tarley that made him ride in a circle to wear off temper before answering. House Hightower could not bear open insult. Neither could House Tyrell. Tywin balanced them because balancing was what he did. He did not love it. He loved very little beyond the feeling that the world was once again, for a moment, arranged. When a courier brave enough or foolish enough to ride the King's Road in winter staggered into the Red Keep with a message from the north, the wax on it was gray as old flesh. Stannis had broken Ramsay Bolton outside Winterfell's walls and opened them. Roose had retreated, slow and deadly. There were fires in the castle's inner ward and men nailed to crosses along the outer wall who were no longer screaming because the cold had taken their throats. Stannis held the hall where kings had eaten. Snow did not admit kings. "Shall we send him a crown?" Cersei said acidly, when the small council gathered and the letter was read aloud, as if repeating it in other mouths would make it less true. "We shall send him food," Tywin said, "and keep count." "Why not send him a daughter?" Marjorie asked softly, her hands smooth on her lap. "Or a promise?" "Because we do not have a daughter we can spare," Tywin said, not looking at Cersei, and Marjorie lowered her eyes in a gesture that could be read as modesty or calculation or both. "And because promises given to Stannis are counted in a currency he has minted himself. He is not expensive. He is very dear." He sent a letter to Wyman Manderley that did not speak of phrase and of pies and of songs, and received one in return that was all feasts and friendship and nothing at all, which told him what he needed to know. The North was not finished, even if it had been beaten like a dog. He would not put his hand out to be bitten. He would wait until the dog came sidewise with its head down, and then he would offer it a bone that was also a leash. Jaime returned from Riverrun with lines deeper at the corners of his eyes and a patience that looked like despair but was in fact something different. He went about his duties with a steadiness that did not draw notice. That was a kind of victory one learned to love when the other kinds grew rare. Tywin did not ask about the White Book. Jaime did not speak of it. Between a father and a son there are seas of silence wider than any strait. On a night when rain at last came soft as a belated apology and the city exhaled as if it had been held by the throat for an hour, Tywin sat alone with the window open and the map table cleared. He held a letter in his hand and considered where to place it. There was no pin for a letter that spoke of a girl across the world walking among freedmen with dragons wheeling above her like anxious swallows. The Master of Whisperers had written, "She is learning to rule," which is another way of saying she is learning to be bored by her own power. She will sail. Not tomorrow. Not tomorrow's tomorrow. But she will sail because girls who are told they are queens do not forget it when their ankles are sore. "You would come to me eventually," Tywin said aloud to the room, and if anyone had heard him, they would have thought him speaking to a sergeant or a daughter. He was speaking to time. "You always do." At Castle Black, Tyrion stood with Jon on a night so cold and clear that the stars seemed a pattern men might learn to read if their fingers did not fall off first. "Your father lives," Jon said, as if setting a piece on a board. "He does," Tyrion said, "and he rules." "Then the realm is quieter," Jon said, "though not safer." "No realm is safe," Tyrion said. "There are only realms that are less surprised." Jon's breath fogged. "What will your father do when the dead come?" "Pretend they are a northern problem until they are in his cellars," Tyrion said. "And then he will try to make them pay rent." Jon laughed. A short, sudden sound. It was good to hear. "And us? We will coup. And tea our candles," Tyrion said. "We will measure our soup. We will keep watch. We will send ravens and not expect answers. That is what men do when the things in the dark begin to enjoy being seen." "Is that enough?" Jon asked. "It is what we have," Tyrion said. He thought of his father's hands, the way the veins ran stiff along the back like small branches. He thought of chains and of choices. Sometimes that is the difference between a story that ends and one that continues. Men went to sleep. Men woke. A boy in the Flea Bottom learned to pick pockets and met a girl who stabbed him through the hand when he tried. A lord in the Reach learned that barley grows whether a man prays to the seven or crows. In Dorne, a girl practiced with a spear and a smile and learned that patience was more difficult than violence. In the Vale, Elaine Stone poured precious warm wine into the cup of a man who had once marched with dragons and now had trouble climbing stairs. Tywin Lannister did not enjoy dreams, which was fortunate, as he did not have many. When he slept as a man who has built a wall around his bed. He woke early and read by candle and wrote words that turned men's feet and ships' prows. He thought sometimes, without words, of his wife's quiet laugh and a daughter's hand in his and a son's first breath. Not the one he had complained about, but the first breath, the miraculous annoyance. He set such thoughts aside as one sets aside a cup of sweet wine when there is a counsel to be endured. A year slid past as a knife slides through a blunt loaf, ragged at the edges but cutting. The Ironborn were beat back and returned and beat back again, and Euron Bleak, Crow's Eye they began to call him, learned the coast like a lover's shoulder and kissed it cruelly. The Faith learned that swords did not suit them as well as cylindrical hats once had, and they went back to their prayers and their soup kettles and their politics. The Reach measured and fed. The Stormlands had a gap where a king might once have stood. Space has power, and men filled it with noise. The North ate its dead and clung to its living and waited for spring, which was a word one says in winter the way one says the name of a lover too far to touch. The East boiled as it always had. Dragons grew. When the first report came to King's Landing that one of Daenerys Targaryen's beasts had been seen lifting a man from a tower by the roof of his mouth, Tywin put the letter down and did not move for a full measure of the hour candle. Then he called for Qyburn. "You have a mind for devices," he said. "If a lizard the size of a stable comes to my city, I would like its head on my gate." Qyburn bowed. "Then we must look to the days when dragons were meat," he said, eyes bright, "and to the things we have now that they did not." "Do not frighten the queen," Tywin said. "She is drowned enough in her own waking dreams. Work with Lord Hightower's smiths and the Gold Cloak's armorers. Quietly. And if the dragon's mother comes as well?" Qyburn asked. He loved problems the way other men love women. "Then we will talk to her like reasonable people," Tywin said. "And if she does not prove reasonable, we will treat her like any other invader. We will count her ships. We will count her men. We will count her dragons and arrange that they are fewer." He sent ravens to Stannis that did not use flattery but did not neglect respect. He sent stores north. He sent Ser Balon Swan to Dorne with a smile and a guard and a silence about knights and skulls that made Balon sweat beneath his plate. He married Cersei to Loras with ceremony and delicacy, and when she did not cry, he respected her for it and did not say so. On the day the first snow fell in King's Landing in 2 generations. Not a dusting that melted when it touched stone but real flakes, fat and heavy. Tommen put out his tongue to catch them and laughed. Men looked up. Women held their children closer. The city hummed, uneasy and excited. Tywin wrapped his fur about his shoulders and walked to the window. "Grandfather," Tommen said from the carpet, "do cats like snow?" "Some do," Tywin said. "Most pretend they do not." Tommen considered this with the seriousness of a boy ordering his world by cats. "Then I shall bring Ser Pounce in," he said, lifting the cat as if it were a jewel and not a creature that hated being presented. Ser Pounce bore it with a grace that promised claws later. Tywin Lannister looked out at the falling white with the satisfaction of a man who has covered the table with stones and sees that, for now, they have not been knocked off. He did not fool himself that winter could be held by the wrist and made to wait. He simply made sure the doors were barred, the cellars full, the guards paid, the letters written, the ships provisioned, the archers trained, the dragons counted, the debts arranged, the enemies divided, the allies closer than they liked and farther than they feared. He had spared a son because killing him had been a worse choice. He had bound a daughter because letting her loose would have had a cost he did not wish to pay. He had bent a son who would not break and chosen not to feel injured by it. He had shut a door on a whore who could not be trusted to stay bought and chosen not to think of how warm her hands had been because warmth has no place in a ledger's column. He had, in short, lived longer than he was meant to, which was perhaps the only miracle he would ever permit. Far to the north, on a night when the aurora burned a pale, greenish wound across the sky, Tyrion and Jon stood again at the wall's edge. "He still lives," Jon said, without looking away from the light. He meant Tywin, of course. There are names that are understood even when they are not said. He does, Tyrion said. And for all our sakes, it is perhaps as well. He will never believe until he sees, Jon said. Few men do, Tyrion said. And those who do are called Mad-U, until the moment they are called necessary. What will you do when the horn sounds? Jon asked quietly, in that tone he used when he did not want the night to hear. I will do what I have always done, Tyrion said. I will take a quill and write and make sure that when men come back hungry and bleeding, the pot is hot and there is bread to put in it. And if a dragon comes and sits on our wall, I will ask it for a light for my pipe. Jon laughed again. The laugh sounded like a thing set free. Below them, a torch guttered and flared, and a man's shadow grew and shrank like a breath. South of them, in a room warmed by coals and ambition, Littlefinger unfolded a new map he had drawn for himself, one where the roads curved differently and high places were lower. He smiled as a man smiles at a tight knot he can undo at his leisure. In Dorne, the Sand Snakes listened to a story about a sister's death and agreed on nothing except that it should cost someone. In the Reach, a grandmother who had once been a girl remembered how to sting and wrote a letter that made 3 men in King's Landing reach for wine in the same hour. And in the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister sat at his desk while snow fell beyond the windows and the sea took each wave and laid it down. He sharpened his quill. He drew another line across the map, a supply route, a winter road, a contingency. He could not plan for everything, but what he planned for he arranged with such care that chaos could not find a purchase. He placed one last pin into the wood where the wall stood, solitary and too long and too thin, and exactly where it had to be. He considered the lion he had made of himself and his house and almost allowed himself a breath that was close to pride. Then he bent again to his work, because lions who live learn that roaring is a luxury, and winter prefers those who labor.